When you think about the future, so you said it's 2017, so that's what, 8 years that it's been up
Yeah.
and running. Yeah. What do you think the next 8 to 10 years will hold for the initiative? How does that look like to you?
Uh, don't know. I think it's a bit of a fork in the road. I think that one potential path, which could certainly happen, is whereby it really accelerates. It really accelerates because I think that Equality FC, the concept of it, the way of running a club like this, the way of treating women's team like this, I think has found its moment. Sometimes you can be quite a lot years ahead of your time. You just need to hold on. Again, it's the other thing about a lot of business ideas. It's amazing how often, like a really good business idea, takes much longer to hit than you think, but hits bigger than you think. It's a very common occurrence. Obviously, some are shit and they just don't happen, but this isn't one of those. So I think that it can hit way bigger than it currently is because I think the platform is established. The Lewes brand is very strong, way stronger than the actual size of the club measured by turnover. So I think that's very bright. But I also think that I call it a fork in the road because I think that women's football in England, um, if nothing changed from this point on, I think shows every sign of becoming a another version of men's football rather than what it can be, which I think would be a disaster socially and a disaster commercially. So it's clearly not all in the hands of Lewes Football Club. There are things as we speak at the moment going on about the structure of the leagues in England, women's leagues in England. And I think the key decision that everybody in the industry needs to make, not just the elite clubs at the top, is what women's football is what it can be.
You mentioned there just I suppose the last question on the initiative and the Equality FC, but you mentioned there a concern about women's football eventually replicating men's football. Are you concerned that the leagues are essentially going to replicate the men's leagues as well due to the financial ability that some of those Premiership teams
Yeah,
can capture that broadcast revenue
yep,
and comparatively the amount they can invest into their women's teams? Is that
yeah.
a
I mean,
concern?
no, that's absolutely concerned. I mean, the reason it's concerned is because it already happened. It just I don't know if anyone noticed it. So Chelsea have won or winning the WSL title 5 years in a row. Um, if you look at almost every league, women's league around Europe, you will see not just Europe actually, but you will see a dominant club, maximum a dominant three club. So Chelsea, Arsenal in this country. If you go into the league and all the cup competitions in England in the last 5 7 years, is only two or three teams that have won it. Maybe I'm missing one team out of it, but essentially it's already a domination. They've got Spain, La Liga. I mean, Barcelona's record at the top is something. I've figure off the top of my head, it's something like in the last 5 seasons of something like 140 games, it lost three. If you go to France, then basically you have Lyon and PSG. If you go to almost most, Sweden's more open. Italy's Juventus, it's getting a bit more open, but essentially you already have a domination by the usual men's clubs suspects. And the reason is very straightforward, is that it's not an open and fair and free market. So as this market has started and formed, those players, as in clubs, those market players who have access to capital are the ones that dominate. So when we looked at that figure for the most fully reported accounts of £48 million, the new figures are just coming out now, and a third of that was group support, which was like money pushed over the table from the men's club. And in many respects, why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't it be? One should say, great to invest in women's football, but one of the one of the consequences from it is a complete distortion of the market, and this has happened in all the top leagues in women's football. So the answer to the question is that am I worried about it? Yes, because it's already happened. So the question now is how to stop it getting worse, which is why when you hear about in England about allegedly temporarily removing relegation from the top WSL in order to make the leagues bigger, then one can't but have a concern that that may move from temporary to permanent. and end up with a closed league. Very few clubs and players or fans want that, but because there's been this, the version of the Men's Premier League, the NewCo, now WPLL, formed. It's just had having its first full year, which owns the top two leagues. It has a lot of power and say about what happens. That is a concern. The difficulty here is, I think, that people look jealously over the Atlantic and look at the NWSL, which is clearly, which with the traditional culture and history of men's and women's sport in the States are closed leagues. So the NWSL is the closed main soccer league. Over there, you've seen, valuations. You've seen there's the fee that you pay if you want to get into the NWSL. You go through a process, you apply, and then you have to pay the charge, the license. And you go back literally just a few years, that was $2 million. The most recent one, which is a team in Denver, it's called the expansion fee, have paid, I think, over $100 million, which means that automatically the valuations of all the other clubs have shot up. And this is the Angel City effect, really, because they haven't been very good on the pitch for the first few years of operating, but one thing at a time. But they've been absolutely brilliant at marketing, and then basically sold for a valuation of $250 million. So when people look over at States, go, oh, wow, really huge valuations, that will bring in investment. We should have a closed league because that's how you do it. I think it's too simplistic to say that's why valuations are so big. Also, I think that the lack of relegation and promotion is countercultural to European sport. I also think it's just a downright silly idea, because I think there are better methods for attracting investment and taking just a bit more time to build. But this is why I describe things as being in the balance at the moment, because we are in the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's watch this space and see how things continue to develop. I suspect.
Yeah.
Do you ever face any resistance as a club? You've mentioned that there might be some resistance to a regulator or kind of policy which tried to enshrine supporter involvement in governance. But do you as a club ever face any resistance, or do you get that sense at all from other clubs, from other stakeholders within the industry?
Yeah, I think some people think Lewes is a pain in the arse. I think that includes people maybe who are on the receiving end of a campaign, be it about equity, be it about prize money in the FA Cup, be it about whatever. I think that, when you're the mouse that roared, some people just want to put a lot of mousetraps down, which I kind of understand. I also think that, within the fan support of Lewes Football Club and stuff, there's always going to be, groups of people. It's not kind of one party state whereby people sort of go, I don't like what you're doing, or I'd rather it happened this way. Like I say, Equality FC didn't kind of get ushered in with like an overall set of fanfare, everyone going, that's a great idea, on we go. It certainly didn't, internally as well, and amongst some parts of the fan base. But over time, I think it's demonstrated itself to be commercially as well as morally an incredibly good pioneering move. And it's I think it's very important that Lewes Football Club and other clubs of its ilk, which have a campaigning element, keep doing what they're doing, because it's, I think the men's game is gone. I think the men's game is irretrievable in terms of trying to structurally change it, and I think that pisses off a lot of fans of men's football, to be honest with you. But I think that, and I'm an optimist, but I think that ship has sailed. I think you can do some stuff to regulate it, and that's good. But I think it's always going to be a slog. Whereas in women's football, this is why it's such a hope for football generally, but mostly for women's football, because everything is still possible. And I was looking at the questions you sent. If there was one piece of regulation that I would introduce to cement what Lewes and clubs of its ilk have been doing, is I would ask the UK government to introduce a UK version of the Title IX law in the United States. So for your viewers who are not aware what that is, so Title IX was a piece of legislation introduced in 1972, I think it was, in the United States, which meant that any educational establishment receiving national federal money had to offer equal opportunity within its college to men and women. in sport. So what that meant was when that law came in, because obviously loads of colleges were receiving federal money, so almost overnight, all these colleges and higher education establishments, universities, had to suddenly offer loads of opportunities to women and girls because they weren't doing it before. And soccer was one of the big things they lighted on. So because of this enormous stick that was brought in, it fundamentally changed the expenditure and the esteem of women's sport at universities and colleges in the States. And it is the single biggest reason why the United States women's national team has dominated football since the 90s, because the build-up of developing all these athletes and facilities has been phenomenal. So if I imagine having a Title IX in the UK that said exactly the same thing, that said if you get money from the UK government, directly or indirectly, which by the way would mean anyone who receives money from the Football Foundation or Sport England, because that indirectly comes from the government, the FA, because they get money from the government, particularly putting in a bid for a major sporting event. So all of these organizations and stuff would in turn be making sure that money was spent and opportunities were given equally to women as well as men. It would fundamentally change the landscape in this country.